Long before skyscrapers, smartphones, or even farming, there were the Neanderthals, not myths or monsters, but real humans, who roamed the cold wilderness of Ice Age Europe. For hundreds of thousands of years, they survived in silence until they vanished. Their bones tell stories. Skulls with thick brows, wide noses, stocky builds, built for endurance, crafted by evolution to weather harsh, frozen lands. They weren't slow brutes, they were survivors, warriors of nature's cruelest trial. Neanderthals weren't our ancestors, but our cousins. They belonged to the Homo genus, just like us. But while we became Homo sapiens, they evolved along a separate path. They first appeared roughly 400,000 years ago in Europe, born into a brutal world of ice, predators, and relentless struggle. Yet they adapted and dominated that world for millennia. They hunted mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, bison, and deer, with nothing but stone tools, wooden spears, and their own raw strength. They were the apex survivors of an unforgiving age. Their tools were part of what scientists call the Mousterian tradition. These weren't just sharpened rocks, these were crafted blades, scrapers, and hunting gear, carefully made, often from flint, and passed down through generations. They shaped their tools with precision using techniques that required planning and skill. Some tools were hafted attached to wooden shafts with sinew and glue. This wasn't random experimentation, it was knowledge. Tradition craftsmanship. They made use of fire not just for warmth, but for cooking and protection. Their hearts have been found deep inside caves, dark and cold. There, they gathered, rested, and possibly shared moments beyond mere survival. They likely wore clothing made from animal hides, stitched together with bone needles, fur-lined garments, boots, and hoods to fight the bitter cold. These weren't fashion choices, they were acts of survival engineering. Anatomically, Neanderthals were built for endurance and cold climates. They had barrel-shaped chests, short limbs, and large noses to warm frozen air. Their bones were thick and heavy, showing intense muscular strength. Their brains were just as big as ours, sometimes even larger, but differently shaped, especially in areas tied to visual and motor control. This suggests the world experienced through touch, sight, and movement more than words, yet we underestimate them. We often imagine them grunting in caves, unaware of anything beyond food or fire. But archaeological finds tell a far more human story. They lived in small groups, probably families. They cooperated, hunted together, and possibly shared food. Evidence suggests some groups returned to the same seasonal camps for generations. They knew the land. They followed herds. They tracked weather and patterns. They used natural shelters, caves, rock outcroppings, or open-air sites. And some may have even built primitive dwellings from wood, bones, and hides. And they were widespread, from the windswept cliffs of Portugal to the frozen plains of Siberia. From the forests of Germany to the mountains of Israel, each population adapted to its unique environment. Some used marine resources, like shellfish and fish. Others focused on large game or forest foraging. Regional specialists of survival. In caves like Shanidar in Iraq, skeletons were found buried beneath layers of soil. One, dubbed Shanidar 1, had a withered arm and blindness in one eye. Had lived a long life, which means someone took care of him. Another skeleton in the same cave was found surrounded by pollen wildflowers. Could this have been a burial, a ritual, a sign of emotion? Maybe, just maybe, they mourned their dead. Some archaeologists believe Neanderthals may have practiced symbolism. They wore ornaments like eagle talons or pierced animal teeth. These weren't tools. They were decoration, identity, expression. In caves like La Pasiga and Ardales in Spain, red ochre markings have been found. Dots, lines, and handprints 65,000 years old. And these caves were visited before modern humans arrived. Did Neanderthals invent art before we did? It's a controversial claim, but if true, it rewrites what it means to be human. Creativity, ritual, and culture weren't exclusive to us. They didn't just survive, they lived. They felt pain, joy, perhaps love. They had communities, traditions, and memories. And yet, their story was headed for an ending. Somewhere around 70,000 years ago, modern humans began migrating from Africa. We spread fast, armed with advanced tools, abstract language, and large social networks. And with our arrival, the world of Neanderthals began to change. Did we compete with them for food, shelter, and territory? Did we drive them into more hostile lands? Or simply outlast them? Or did we blend? Because here's the twist: Neanderthals didn't disappear completely. They live on the inside us. Every non-African person alive today carries 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, which means they didn't vanish entirely. They were absorbed. They met us, fought us, mated with us. Their blood still pulses in our veins. But back then, they didn't know their time was ending. They didn't know they were the last of their kind. They just kept moving. So they ruled Ice Age Europe for over 300,000 years. Then something changed. A new kind of human arrived, and everything Neanderthals knew began to unravel. We Homo sapiens emerged from Africa with sharper tools and larger tribes. Our minds were wired for symbols, strategy, and complex language, and we were spreading fast, relentless, like a storm across continents. The first encounters between Neanderthals and modern humans were likely subtle. Not battles, not wars, but quiet contact between two intelligent species. Glances across the tundra, shared hunting grounds, moments of tension. Then came curiosity, then came fear, then came something far more lasting. We didn't just fight or flee, we mated with them. And that genetic exchange still lives on in us today. Your blood may carry echoes of Neanderthal strength, and some of us inherited traits like improved immunity or thicker hair. Some inherited Neanderthal-linked risks, depression, nicotine addiction, even COVID-19 severity. But what did the Neanderthals get from us? Hard to say. They may have gained little and lost everything, because soon after our arrival, they began to vanish. At first, they withdrew into the margins, colder regions, harsher lands. Maybe they were pushed out, maybe they chose isolation, but step by step, their world shrank. We brought more than competition, we brought numbers. Larger tribes meant greater cooperation, more children, and broader ideas. We adapted faster, and our social structures allowed us to dominate. Our technology moved forward at a rapid pace. We carved needles, created tailored clothing, and invented projectile weapons. These tools weren't just smarter, they were game changers. Neanderthals still used thrusting spears, dangerous close-range hunting tools. We launched weapons from a distance, changing the rules of survival. Less risk, more reward. And our communication gave us an edge. We spoke in complex languages, sharing stories, plans, and memories. That's not just language, that's culture. We painted caves with visions of animals and dreams. We carved figurines and symbols, expressions of identity, faith, or magic. And we taught our children to dream even bigger. But don't mistake this as proof of superiority. Neanderthals were capable, creative, and resilient. They simply lived in a different rhythm, one that didn't keep pace with ours. Climate change dealt them another blow. As ice sheets advanced and retreated, their world became unpredictable. Resources vanished, herds moved, ecosystems collapsed. They had no written language, no way to record their knowledge. When elders died, wisdom died with them. And as generations passed, their grip on survival slipped. There are signs of desperation in the final chapters. Neanderthals scavenged more, hunted less. Their tools became simpler, not more advanced. Camps grew smaller, populations shrank. They began retreating to isolated pockets like Gibraltar. There, surrounded by cliffs and sea, the last Neanderthals made their stand. One by one, the lights of their kind went out, not in a blaze of glory, but in quiet extinction. No war, no collapse, just silence. And yet, some sparks remained. In our DNA, in the bones beneath our feet, in artifacts buried deep within forgotten caves. For decades, scientists debated what killed them. Was it us? Was it disease? Was it climate? The truth is, it was likely everything. Imagine being a Neanderthal elder. You remember the old days, when herds were plenty and your people were strong. Now you see fewer children, more hunger, strange newcomers in your land. You watch the skies change, the winters grow longer. Your children speak of a people with fire, songs, and strange tools. You know, the end is near even if you don't have words for it. And perhaps that last tribe of Neanderthals knew they were the last. Perhaps what did it mean to be Neanderthal, not just in body, but in mind? Were they simple survivors, or thinkers with imagination, memory, and feeling? What if we've misunderstood their silence for emptiness? Their brains were large and average, as big or even bigger than ours. But size alone doesn't tell the whole story. It's the shape, the wiring, the unseen sparks that define a mind. Their brain structure suggested strength in vision and spatial awareness, perfect for navigating forests, tracking prey, and sensing movement. A mind built not just to see but to survive through observation and action. But what about emotion? What about thought? Can bones and tools reveal love, fear, loyalty, or sorrow? Surprisingly, they can, and they do. Take the case of Shanadar I, found in Iraq's Zagros mountain. He was old, crippled, blind in one eye, with a deformed arm and leg. But he lived many years because someone took care of him. This wasn't just instinct, it was compassion. This was caregiving, loyalty, and protection. This was community, not chaos. Nearby, another skeleton, Shanadar IV, was found surrounded by pollen. Wildflowers carefully placed, not by chance, but by intention. Could it have been a burial, a farewell, a ritual of memory? If so, it would mean Neanderthals grieved, that they saw death not as an end, but as a passage, that they honored those who walked before them. And then there's the eternal human fingerprint. In the caves of Spain, in places like La Pasiga and Art, researchers found red ochre hand stencils, dots, and ladders older than modern humans. These paintings date back over 64,000 years before our kind entered Europe. They were deep inside caves, requiring torches and planning to reach. This wasn't graffiti. It was deliberate, symbolic, spiritual. Did they paint what they feared, what they hunted, or what they dreamed in flickers of firelight and shadow? No one knows, but it means they imagined. They also wore pendants made from animal teeth, bones, and shells. Decorative objects found far from their natural sources, likely traded or passed on. These weren't tools. They were expressions of identity, perhaps even status. They created glue from birch bark and ancient adhesive to fix tools that required heating bark in the absence of oxygen, a complex process, which means Neanderthals weren't guessing, they were experimenting and innovating. They even crafted feathers and claws into ornaments. Why? Perhaps to intimidate, attract, or celebrate. Whatever the reason, it means they cared how they looked like us. Some scientists believe they might have had music. A flute-like instrument made from bird bones was found in Slovenia. Was it Neanderthal? The debate continues, but if true, they had rhythm. They could have danced around firelight to bone flutes and drumbeat, told stories through sound before words were formed. Music before language may have echoed through their caves. But did they speak? That's the ultimate question. The shape of their hyoid bone, which supports the tongue and voice box mod, this suggests the capacity for speech wasn't uniquely ours. They may not have had rich vocabularies, but perhaps they had short phrases, vocal tones, and gestures enough for cooperation and culture, enough to name a child, to warn of danger, to remember the dead. After all, they lived in tight-knit groups. Cooperation was essential for hunting, shelter, and raising young. Without communication, their world would have fallen apart. And they weren't alone in their minds. They had dreams too. Perhaps. What did a Neanderthal see when they stared into fire at night? Did they wonder about the stars, the spirits, or life beyond? If they could bury, decorate, sing, and mourn, then they could feel, imagine, and perhaps even believe. They weren't beasts. They were human, just another version of it. We often mistake absence for ignorance. Just because they didn't leave books, temples, or cities, doesn't mean they didn't have culture. Their lives were passed down, not in writing, but in memory. From elder to child, from hunt to hunt, from cave to fire, a long chain of stories, broken only by extinction. But maybe they didn't need cathedrals or pyramids. Maybe the stars were their temples, and the earth their altar. Maybe the fire itself was sacred enough. Because in every ritual, every buried body, every carved talent, there is intention, there is thought, there is all of which points to a rich, inner world we're only beginning to understand. So when we think of Neanderthals, we must look beyond the bone. We must imagine the person, the tribe, the story, the emotion behind the brow, and the meaning behind the silence. They didn't build empires, but they lived fully. They didn't write poetry, but they felt deeply. They didn't survive the future, but they shaped the past. In many ways, their world was more pure, more raw, more connected. A life dictated by nature, family, and firelight. Simple but never shallow. And as we learn more about them, we begin to understand ourselves a little better too, because what they were is still part of who we are. The last Neanderthal may have died 40,000 years ago, but their story didn't end. It merged with ours, because today Neanderthals are still very much alive, inside us. For decades, scientists thought they vanished without a trace. Extinct, forgotten, a failed experiment, inhuman. But then came a breakthrough that changed everything: DNA. In 2010, scientists sequenced the Neanderthal genome. It was a moment as profound as splitting the atom, because in those ancient genes, they found us. Modern and African humans carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, not in fossils, not in bones, but in living people. Every time you blink, breathe, or think, a part of them stirs. That means we didn't just replace them. We interbred, shared homes, maybe even raised children together. Some lineages survive through love, not conquest. So what did we inherit? More than you might think. Genes that affect skin color, hair texture, and immune responses. Some scientists believe our ability to adapt to non-African climates came from them. Our resistance to certain diseases, our sensitivity to pain, our skin's ability to tan or burn in sunlight, all may trace back to those cold forests and the Neanderthals who endured them. But there's a darker side to this legacy too. Neanderthal DNA has been linked to depression, nicotine addiction, and blood clotting disorders. Even COVID-19 severity was shown to be worse in those with certain inherited variants. Their DNA whispers in our brains as well. It may affect how we process emotion, sleep, and memory. Our dreams, anxieties, and creativity may all carry their ancient fingerprint. It's strange, isn't it? that long after they vanished, they still shape our lives in silence. They're more than fossils, they're ancestors. We used to call them primitive. But what does primitive mean when their genes still build our body, when their endurance flows through your veins? Perhaps we owe them more respect. They braved cold and death, fought beasts and hunger, and in their last act, gave a piece of themselves to the future. But why did they go extinct, and not us? Was it bad luck, a shift in climate, or simply the weight of time? The answer is probably complex and deeply human. We had numbers, speed,